Hi, welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today is going to be a little bit of a departure from my normal World War II style content, World War II history. Today we're taking a little leap further back into history. We're going to be going over Napoleonic warfare tactics, what it was like for troops on the ground, examples of how it evolved and why it no longer exists. So, and ultimately that's why it's part of history. But this video is actually dedicated to my European history class, 19th century history class, which is instructed by a great professor. His name is Dr. Peterson, good teacher. If you ever take classes at the University of Southern Mississippi, or you are interested in history and want a good place to take classes, USM no doubt has great history professors, and Dr. Peterson is among them. I would highly recommend that you take some of his classes. Especially if they're offered an online platform. That way there's remote learning, which of course with the age of the pandemic, everything seems to be remote at the moment. But without further ado, let's get into the video, and if you choose to stick around, I think you'll find it pretty interesting. Let's go. Alright, so, Napoleonic warfare. What is it? So generally speaking, Napoleonic warfare is going to be the style of warfare that Napoleon Bonaparte pioneered, mostly with the early quarter of the 19th century, the early 1800s. You could see that throughout Napoleon's campaigns and the way these wars were fought, especially with the rise of national identity. You could definitely tell that there was more of a organized effort to make combat and transitions of formations and transitions of troops from one formation to another to effectively fight the enemy more fluid and make communication better. With all of that being said, so you are looking at having a more fluid transition of your troop formations and more effective communication on the battlefield to effectively fight your enemy. One of the other things that you're going to notice, and this is with the pioneering of Napoleon Bonaparte's military tactics that just eventually become the standard for the next nearly 100 years for most modern militaries. Combined arms. You're going to have a lot of use of, cavalry, artillery, infantry, in conjunction together to effectively combat your enemy. Now, Wikipedia, I totally understand that Wikipedia is a sketchy source because just anybody can change something if they're a member. I completely understand why Wikipedia is not considered to be a scholarly source. However, the argument I'm trying to make here is, if somebody looks up Napoleonic warfare, I can tell you right now, one of the first things that's going to pop up is Wikipedia. Now, just a general overview, this is not the subject of the video, but just not a deep investigation thereof, but a general glance and a general overview look at what Wikipedia says Napoleonic warfare is generally pretty accurate. So what you would see from Wikipedia itself is that it is exactly saying exactly that: infantry, cavalry, artillery, and combined arms assaults, which is what that is. Being able to move quickly, being able to dump large amounts of volume of fire into your enemy, which this is just the nature. I mean, you don't need Wikipedia to understand this. You don't need any information to really understand it. If you've seen any kind of film or documentary about that era in history, you can tell, even by the American Revolution, you could tell that the purpose of this style of lining up chest to chest, shoulder to shoulder with your guys, and just dumping large volumes of fire into the enemy. This is the way Napoleonic warfare works. You are simply going shoulder to shoulder with your fellows, your comrades, and there's a column behind you aiming over your shoulder, and you're aiming, and all of you just salvo lead downrange into your enemy, and you reload. And that is effectively the point of Napoleonic warfare. But that's a general overview of what Wikipedia would say. So the argument I'm trying to make is, if somebody looks it up on Wikipedia, is that accurate? And is that what Napoleonic warfare is? Which, in general, yes. And I have a primary source that can attest. I actually have two primary sources that can attest to that this is the nature of Napoleonic warfare. Apologize if there's any shakiness or noise in the camera. The camera is old, so I'm working on updating that. So moving on. So volley fire, mass fire, salvos into your enemy. Try to push each other off the field. Basically, each side's trying to see which one can bully the other off of the field. Aside from, generalized mass volume fire, musket fire into the other side, and see who can take more casualties, and who can plug the most holes before the other gets pushed off the field. Aside from that, you're going to deal with cavalry usually being present, artillery support becoming, I personally believe that the reason that artillery support is such a big deal in the military from the 20th century onward is because of Napoleonic warfare, because artillery was used as a support tool as well as a assaulting tool, or a softening up tool. You could see that in World War I with the eventual expiration of Napoleonic warfare and its tactics, but you would have your infantry moving forward with cavalry there to also help fight the other infantry or the other cavalry of the other side. And artillery could fire way over their head onto the other side, and you could be employing counter battery fire, attacking the other side's artillery to prevent them from attacking either your artillery or your infantry with canister shot or grape shot. Grape shot is like a big shotgun. It's going to scatter shrapnel onto your men or your cavalry. Canister shot is like an aerial burst, which is essentially the same thing, but it flies up into the air and explodes over their heads, raining down shrapnel. Solid shot would be, something that's just going to hit the ground, bounce, and hit a bunch of people. But the different types of barrages, counter battery fire, you're going to be shooting at their artillery. A standard fixed position barrage where you're just trying to keep their heads down, or you're attacking or bombarding one solid fixed position. Creeping barrages, which were probably the most innovative in my opinion, which you see this all the way up until World War I and probably after. But it's a gradual barrage where you start at one point and you are firing over the heads of your infantry, where they are advancing towards your opponent, and they are laying down a solid shield of artillery fire ahead of your advance. So it's supposed to clear the path or weaken resistance in your way to make your advance more expedient. So the American Civil War is another. I mean, the American Civil War was fought with Napoleonic tactics, and it's another great example that we feel a little bit more personally here in our own home country. So another big deal here with Napoleonic warfare. Benning.army.mil, which is a website that I have found, that it actually talks about how Napoleon made massive contributions to what would eventually become known as just modern warfare. So, the ability to communicate effectively on the field, to be able to move your troops and displace your troops from one position to another, and then back again, effectively, quickly, cleanly, neatly, without hesitation, just like in my opinion probably one of the better primary sources that you can find and you can still buy reproductions of is the Hardy's Infantry Manual for soldiers during the American Civil War. And you can see, if you buy a Hardy's manual, a Hardy's Infantry Manual will give you details on an order. Excuse me. The Hardy's Manual will give you details on something such as an order, like by company into line, march. One of the other primary sources that you can look at as an example of how this effective communication on the battlefield could be used, or the efficiency with which moving troops became paramount, is the Hardy's Infantry Manual during the American Civil War. One of the orders that you can find in this primary source is by company into line, march. And this order, by company into line, would be issued by an officer, echoed by non-commissioned officers, and followed by troops. So the idea behind this is marching in a column, and you take direct contact from the front, meaning your enemy is ahead of you, and you are marching forward in a column. So you are marching forward like this. And the idea behind by company into line, your company will swing out in one direction from where it is at, like in its column. The officer will shout, by company into line, and the non-commissioned officers will echo, by company into line. And at this point, second sergeants will move out to their positions to guide their segment of the company. And when they say march and the NCOs echo march, all of the men in the company will swing out and line up with their second sergeants to form a battle line. So you went from a file and you went by company into line to face your enemy. So this form of effective communication and being able to displace from where you were to where you need to be to effectively combat your enemy was vital in Napoleonic warfare.
Mr. Gentleman, ride to General Hood. Ask him, can he maintain his position? Yes, sir. Can he maintain his position? Yeah. Yeah.
Sergeant, isn't it? To shoot a sergeant, you have to fire for 2 men first.
A sergeant never fires his weapon until the men in front of him are killed. And then, only unless you want to show off.
Gentlemen, move the men into this field and wait for further orders. Whip out of the reserve.
Forward! 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 March!
Compliment from General Jackson, sir. He wants to know, can you maintain your position?
Tell General Jackson, unless I get reinforcements, I must be forced back. But I'm going on while I can.
Yes, sir. Reinforcements, yes, sir.
And obviously there are evolutions to this, but nevertheless, moving on. So on top of this, Benning.Army.Mil's website also talks about industrialization in the 1800s. So you see weapons, small arms, military small arms, combat infantry rifles changing. So unlike the early 1800s where everything is like a flintlock with a flash pan that you would prime with powder and cock back and set your strike face back. So that way when the flint hits your strike face, it sparks, ignites the powder, goes through a flash hole, ignites the charge of powder in the barrel and propels a round lead ball downrange, hurtling in a general direction of your enemy. By the American Civil War, even as early as the 1840s with the Mexican-American War, you could see rifled barrels starting to show up. And rifling, what it does is when you seat a ball on top of a charge of powder in the bottom of a barrel, when you ignite that powder, be it by flash pan or percussion cap or whatever, which is another advancement, it twists the projectile, meaning it is more accurate because it is spinning. So it is like almost like when you throw a football. It's going to fly more accurately if you're spinning it. Plus, footballs are elongated. Round balls became more outdated as time went on. So by the time you had the American Civil War, there was something called the mini ball, which was actually an elongated projectile that was rounded on the front and it was straight on the sides, and on the bottom it had a little bit of a recess, sort of like a domed bottom with a cavity on the bottom, so that way you would have better pressure propulsion on the base of the projectile. And another advancement obviously is, like I said, you went from having flash pans to percussion caps. There was no strike face, there was no pan that you had to fill with powder. There was a metallic percussion cap filled with a flammable compound in the bottom. And so when you would put it on the nipple, which has a little vent hole on it, you'd put it on there, cock your hammer back, fire, hammer drops on the metal percussion cap, ignites whatever is inside of the cap, and it jets down into the cavity inside of the nipple, igniting through a vent hole the powder that is inside of the barrel, propelling your mini ball down the rifled barrel, making it more accurate. So while the American Civil War was still fought with these battle lines, these Napoleonic warfare style tactics, with artillery and cavalry in conjunction as part of Napoleonic warfare. You could see how there was industrialization taking place, which allowed the armies to better manufacture their weapons, to make parts interchangeable. If a part breaks, you can replace it because it's the same part that goes on this other gun and this other gun and this other gun, as long as they're of the same model. For example, the 1853, pattern 1853 British Enfield musket, which the Confederacy used a lot, or the 1861 Springfield musket, which the United States used a lot, the North. So you could see standardized manufacturing, interchangeable parts, better manufacturing, rifle barrels for more accuracy. Also, the advent of self-contained ammunition, which was the beginning of the end for Napoleonic warfare. As far as weapons go, they were not muskets anymore. They were becoming rifles, and also you were not using paper cartridges with powder and shot in them. You were actually being given, like with the early lever action Henry rifles, a 44 caliber with 40 grains of black powder, which is how it came to be known as 4440, the cartridge itself. A 44 caliber bullet that could be loaded into the gun. And the Confederacy supposedly had a saying about, that's that gun that the Yankees load on Sunday and shoot all week. You load it in a tube, and the lever action repeats the loading process. You rack it, or work the lever. It cocks back the hammer at the same time as it loads a shell. You pull the trigger, it shoots it. You let the lever down, it ejects it, and you put the lever back up, and it loads a new one in, while at the same time recocking the hammer. So self-contained ammunition was a huge advancement. But then, of course, once you get past the American Civil War, you see things like you went from the Mexican-American War and the Civil War, which were not far separated because members of the military during the Civil War often had fought together in the Mexican-American War. So there was some previous experience there. And you go up to the Spanish-American War, the Span-Am War, where, of course, Teddy Roosevelt fought with the American cavalry volunteers, and this war was just a huge forebodance of what was to come, and the death of Napoleonic warfare as it existed, and as it had evolved. You saw the advent of weapons using smokeless powder, the Krag-Jorgensen bolt-action rifle, the Mauser bolt-action rifle, which was being used by other countries, that the Mauser brothers had designed, which they were German, so the Mauser is a German pattern rifle. The Spanish were using it against the Americans, and the Americans were using a European-designed Krag-Jorgensen bolt-action in 30-40 Krag. So you could just see the use of machine guns also being brought into play. Portable machine guns, people actually carrying around a tripod and a machine gun. This stuff was actually movable. The use of artillery, Battle of San Juan Hill, huge example of that kind of stuff. So really, when you get into it, it's pretty interesting because it's just huge forebodance of what was to come, with the exception of chemical warfare. What was to come in World War I, and eventually it's just this kind of stuff just does not lend itself to you lining up shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of guys and squaring off against a bunch of other guys and just shooting at each other and seeing which one of you can bully the other off the field first with the more, a greater volume of fire. So, what was Napoleonic warfare like for someone on the battlefield? Now, I'm going to start off in the early 1800s, and we're going to move to the mid 1800s. So, according to let's see here, NapoleonSeries.org, which is actually a really interesting series of documents about the Napoleonic Wars in the early 1800s. This primary document is actually written, it's basically after-action reports, or a compilation of reports written by Lieutenant Colonel W.A. Dijon a commander of the National Militia Battalion Number 8, 1st Brigade, 2nd Division of the Mobile Royal Netherlands Army, 8th Battalion National Militia. So in this account, he talks about having 6 companies under his command, that's a battalion. And he's talking about how he's ordered to, if I remember correctly, this is the campaign at Quarter-Bras. Yeah. Taking the position at Quarter-Bras. Yeah. Okay. So he's talking about at 4 hours, 10 hours, different hours, like sort of like military time, but he's talking about, what time of the day things were happening. And all of this was going on during this campaign, the campaigns of 1815. And he's talking about how he had to employ his 5th and 6th Company and deploy them into a group of woods to take the woods from the enemy. And during this process, you see another slight evolution of Napoleonic warfare where the company itself is not fighting in a line because you are in trees and you have to deal with brush and trees and plants getting in the way, foliage. So if you're taking 2 companies and pushing them into a line of trees, obviously you can't have them all standing in line, so they're deploying them as skirmishers. And deploying them as skirmishers, they are skirmishing with the enemy, trading fire with the enemy, getting a read on who's there, how many there are, etc. And then their objective is to push up and take the woods from the enemy as 2 companies in as organized a manner as they are able to in the way that they were trained. But as skirmishers, your intervals are spaced out. And of course, Colonel Dijon has already suffered some artillery casualties to his infantry. And eventually he is ordered to take his remaining 4 companies and push into the woods and reform his companies on the other side of the brush in the woods as quickly as possible, rejoin with 5th and 6th Company, and then push the enemy out of the woods. And after, they're talking about thick hedges, trees, and he was saying, advance into the woods immediately to traverse it and oppose myself against the enemy attacks on the other side. At this moment, the 5th and 6th Company were engaged with the enemy in skirmishing order. I had the company commanders pass through a thick hedge in the wood, and the men follow them in order subsequently and assemble the companies again on the other side of the hedge. So you're having to deal with the panic of battle being fired upon by artillery, worrying whether or not enemy cavalry is going to come up and start slashing at you. And it does not appear in this instance they had any cavalry support. So they were having to move into woods under panic of battle, taking artillery casualties. Go find their 5th and 6th Company. The 4 remaining companies had to move through the trees, into the trees, through all this thick brush, reform, rejoin with 5th and 6th Companies, and then push the enemy out of the woods. So, during all of this is just the chaos of combat. And knowing that you're dispersing your companies through all this brush and then having to rejoin them has to be massively chaotic. But he's talking about also how, their medic, their doctor, was injured by a howitzer shell. His leg was injured. And he spoke well of this officer, this medical officer, because he came back limping on 2 sticks to continue treating men that were injured. And then they give a statement, an after-action report of Colonel Dijon, Lieutenant Colonel Dijon, was himself injured. Wilson, the surgeon, was injured. 3 sub-officers killed, 24 men killed, 9 sub-officers and men heavily injured, 37 lightly injured, 13 taken prisoner. Musket shots, 9,650. Muskets lost, 28. 16 cartridge pouches lost, 7 sabers lost. So it would appear that there may have potentially been some cavalry present. And then, of course, they talk about how on the 17th, the following day, 5th and 6th companies rejoined the battalion, and at 10 hours, the division retired through Ganap and took position on the other side. So then they also mentioned that at 2 hours in the afternoon, they broke camp, meaning they took down their tents or put out their fires, what have you, and marched unto the wood of Waterloo. This was leading up to Waterloo. Took position at Mont-Saint-Jean, where they bivouacked for the night, and during the night, 1 company of flankers at 300 paces in line of advanced posts in front of the division. From the 17th in the afternoon till the 18th morning, 10 hours. Incessant heavy showers, those days being 17th and the 18th, received no provisions, straw, or fuel. So they were dealing with rain, they were dealing with having to move around a lot, but this one large battalion, and actually in this case they said the division itself, which is a couple of thousand of men, probably, because typically divisions are anywhere from 1 to 2,000, I think. But in this particular case, the division retired, and they moved this entire unit around by itself, like this division, they were moving it. So they had no losses on the 17th. The 18th, they had an order to take a hollow road in the first line adjoining their right wing, and there were a battery of horse-drawn artillery. There's a whole after-action report here talking about how eventually, during their attempts to take this road, they actually did take some losses. They had some injuries, heavy injuries, and they suffered 17 heavy wounded, 48 light wounded, 37 sub-officers and men killed during their attempt to take this light road. So there's just the ability to move these men quickly and efficiently, but still be able to fight the enemy effectively, is impressive. But also you understand from reading these accounts how there is combined arms. There's cavalry, there's artillery, and there's infantry being used to fight in conjunction with each other, which is attesting to the fact that at least what Wikipedia is saying here is true. But these men were able to do what they needed to do under the appropriate leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Dejean. And of course, all of these sources will be listed in the description. So, that is a primary source talking about what it was like in the 1800s to fight in Napoleonic warfare. During the Civil War, this is a much more intimate description. This is during the Battle of Antietam. This source is from eyewitnesshistory.com. I know .coms are somewhat sketchy, but this is a good descriptor. So, this is from on the night of September 16th, 9th, New York volunteers took up their position at a stone bridge, opposing stone bridge, crossing Antietam Creek, and awaited orders. So this is David Thompson and his experience, and he's a member of the 9th New York Volunteers. And this is under the command of General Burnside at Antietam. I remember looking behind and seeing an officer riding diagonally across the field, a most inviting target. Instinctively bending his head down over his horse's neck as though he were riding through a driving rain. While my eye was on him, I saw, between me and him, a rolled overcoat with its straps bound into the air and fall among the furrows. One of the enemy's grape shot, shrapnel shot from a cannon, had plowed a groove into the skull of a young fellow and had cut his overcoat from his shoulders. He never stirred from his position, but lay there face downward, a dreadful spectacle. A moment after, I heard a man cursing a comrade for lying on him heavily. He was cursing a dying man. As the range grew better, the firing became more rapid, the situation desperate and exacerbating to the last degree. Human nature was on the race, and there burst forth from it the most vehement, terrible swearing I have ever heard. Certainly the joy of conflict was not ours that day. The suspense was only for a moment. However, for the order to change came just after. Whether the retirement was thrown into disorder or not, I never knew. I only remember that as we rose and started, all the fire that had been held back so long was loosed. In a second, the air was full of the hiss of bullets and the hurtle of grape shot. The mental strain was so great that I saw the moment he singular affected mentioned, I think, in the life of Goethe, on a similar occasion. The whole landscape for an instant turned slight red. I see again, as I saw it in a flash, a man just in front of me dropped his musket and throw up his hands, stung into vigorous swearing by a bullet behind the ear. Many men fell going up the hill, but it seemed to be all over in a moment, and I found myself passing a hollow where a dozen wounded men lay. Among them our sergeant major, who was calling for me to come down. He had caught sight of the blanket rolled across my back and called me to unroll it and help carry from the field one of our wounded lieutenants. So, having heard about a jacket being cut from someone's shoulders due to grape shot, Napoleonic warfare is truly very horrifying. Bayonet charges, volley fire, mass casualties, grape shot, canister shot, raining down ungodly destruction on these human bodies and just ripping them apart. That is an example of Napoleonic warfare from the Civil War. And another added challenge of Napoleonic warfare is, since you are moving these large numbers of men, for example, according to PBS, by the spring of 1812, Napoleon had assembled an army of 600,000 men. These men were from Italy, Poland, Germany, France. And in order to move these men, logistics have to be taken into account. And that is not something that Napoleon took into account. So, according to NPR, here locally it's Mississippi Public Broadcasting, NPR, appetite for war, what Napoleon and his men ate on the march. So, logistically, feeding your army became a huge factor. Being able to supply and feed your military while it is on campaign became extremely important. And Napoleon was quoted as having said, "An army marches on its stomach," the same as Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." However, there is no record of either of them saying those things. So, there was just a huge lack of logistical know-how on the part of Napoleon, because there was actually a case supposedly where one of his soldiers yelled out to him as he passed that they need bread, and he shot back, "Nima," which in Polish means "there is none," and the entire column of infantry burst out into laughter. So they had issues feeding their troops, and obviously this is apparent because during the Russian campaign of Napoleon, a lot of his troops starved to death in Russia. So, logistically, that is another thing. It is a big challenge to move large military bodies of men and feed all of them to keep them in fighting condition. And I personally think that Napoleon would have been wise to follow his own words if he'd actually said them, but his army marches on its stomach, and obviously if you neglect your military force, it's going to fail you because they will die of starvation. But ultimately, these things, these advancements in warfare, kill off Napoleonic warfare. You cannot line up against each other and shoot at each other. You could, but it's going to be extremely fast and a very high attrition rate. You will ultimately see in World War I that artillery barrages, cavalry still being used, infantry trying to line up against each other, eventually digging into trenches and shooting back and forth at each other, and bayonet charging trench to trench and jumping into the trenches, bayoneting each other, trying to clear it. Eventually you see things like airplanes and tanks coming into warfare and rolling up machine guns on trench lines and mowing down men, and the invention of the submachine gun, which is something that's designed to help clear trenches, or the 1897 trench gun, the shotgun that the United States used, or even probably one of the other more dreaded inventions was the use of the flamethrower by the Germans to clear out trenches. Napoleonic warfare was dead, and the officers of the older generation understood that, because with the advent of tanks, flamethrowers, shotguns being used to clear trenches, airplanes, there's just no... We get ideas for future warfare based on the failures of the warfare in World War I. Seeing that Napoleonic warfare was a bygone form of warfare helped us understand how better to fight future wars. And because of World War I and the death of Napoleonic warfare, we see tanks and airplanes being used and machine guns being used, and that is the way of the future. As early as World War I, we began to understand that tanks can be used to roll over the trenches to get behind enemy lines. We don't need to sit there and shoot back and forth at each other and have little back and forth bayonet stab fights. We understand that potentially there's use for airplanes to drop soldiers via parachute behind enemy lines, which becomes a massive tactic during World War II, and is truly put to the test and combat proven in theory by the Soviets prior to World War II, proven in combat by the German Air Force during World War II, as well as the United States Army, I believe as early as 42. So you see the death of Napoleonic warfare in the early parts of the 20th century, as well as the latter parts of the 19th century with things like the Spanish-American War. So that's Napoleonic warfare. I greatly appreciate your viewership. I hope that this has been a good video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Definitely worth researching further. Primary accounts are always very interesting to read, if not just a little bit disturbing, because there's some mental imagery in there that is truly horrifying. But I hope that you guys have enjoyed the video, and until next time, this is Battle Group signing off. Y'all have a good day.